We operate with this comfortable, almost romantic assumption that genius is this rare, beautiful
A
gift.
lightning strike.
Exactly, a lightning strike bestowed on the lucky few. But if you really start to pull on that thread and you look back through history, you find some of the most shocking talents came from people society had already labeled, as idiot or disabled.
And that creates an immediate, really brutal paradox for any system that wants to neatly categorize human value, doesn't it?
It really does.
If ability isn't this singular elevating gift, but maybe it's an extreme byproduct of the brain's imbalance, what does that say about how we even define intelligence?
That deep, unsettling question. That's our mission today. We're doing a deep dive into the historical idea of the idiot savant, which we now call savant syndrome.
Right.
And we're going to trace how these rare individuals have just consistently challenged and often completely broken society's definitions of intellect, of social worth, of what's normal from the 19th century right up to today.
And what you notice right away, which helps define the modern condition, is that savant syndrome. It's extremely rare overall, but it's so strongly correlated with developmental disorders.
That correlation is the key. It's almost unheard of in the general population, but something like 1 in 10 people diagnosed with autism shows some form of savant ability.
Which is why modern science tends to see it less as this total fluke and more as, an extreme manifestation on the spectrum of neurodiversity.
To really feel the weight of this contradiction, let's just start with a story. It comes from 1915 from a newspaper called Review about an 11-year-old boy.
And this anecdote, it just perfectly encapsulates that feeling of a mind completely torn in two.
Okay, so picture this. The boy stands near the railroad tracks. A train, maybe 30 or 40 cars long, rushes past him at, say, 30 miles per hour.
Which is moving pretty fast.
Right. And he could instantly read every single 4-digit number on every car, remember them, and then just correctly sum the entire sequence.
Just think about that task for a moment. The visual processing speed, the instant recall, the calculation. It's just staggering.
It's a genius-level feat, and yet the medical reports show this devastating contrast. This same child couldn't manage the most basic skills. He struggled to feed himself.
Wow.
And he often couldn't even recognize family members he saw every single day.
That is the contradiction. That's what baffled everyone. He wasn't neatly disabled, but he had these severe deficits, social, cognitive, motor skills, paired with what they called an unreasonable talent.
And that led directly to the original 19th century label, the idiot savant.
And the term itself implies a kind of structural, almost physical explanation. The 19th century view was that this wasn't an extra gift, it was a pathology.
Pathology.
Yeah, like one area of the brain had grown way too much, becoming this unnecessary bulge, and to do that, it had to hollow out or suppress all the other areas.
And that label, that very loaded term, was first coined in the 1860s by a French physician, Edouard Seguin. But he wasn't just being clinical, was he? He baked a really controversial class bias right into the diagnosis.
Oh, absolutely. This is where social anxiety just completely hijacks the medical conversation.
Yeah.
Seguin had this incredibly strong and totally unproven conviction that idiot savants almost always came from the wealthier aristocratic classes.
Wait. So not just the brain. He was looking at their bank account. Why would he even make that connection?
Because he saw this imbalance, the specialized talent plus the functional deficit, as a symbolic biological pathology of upper-class uselessness.
Uselessness.
Yes. In his view, these were families that were too far removed from real labor, from contributing to society, and their specialized wealth had led to biological decline. That talent for music or drawing, to him, it was literally an unnecessary bulge on the skull.
That is so aggressive. To take a skill and just downgrade it from genius to a physical marker of societal decay.
It's a perfect reflection of the class anxiety of the time. The middle class was worried that the elite were getting soft, genetically decaying. Seguin's diagnosis basically said, see, even their special talents are a symptom of their failure.
But thankfully, that wasn't the only view. You have the powerful counterpoint from the British physician John Langdon Down.
Yes, the same Dr. Down.
And he disagreed. He said these individuals existed across all classes, and more importantly, he argued their talents should be cultivated.
And his most famous patient is the proof, James Henry Pullen.
Right. So Pullen was sent to an asylum in 1850. He's 15. He's profoundly hearing impaired, basically nonverbal, but he had this singular fascination with wood and tools.
And when Down saw this, he put him in the asylum's workshop. And Pullen's ability just it exploded. He became this master craftsman, carving these incredibly intricate models, ships, machines, all from observation or just from his imagination.
His talent just transcended language, didn't it? He proved skill could communicate even when conventional intellect couldn't.
It did. And society had to notice. His work won awards at international exhibitions. He even got gifts of ivory from Prince Edward, who was just blown away by the detail. Poland showed that talent doesn't need a rational, articulate mind to live in. It'll find its own crevices and just grow.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. By the late 19th century, the whole question of genius becomes a social and political issue. It gets wrapped up in this thing called degeneration theory.
Right. This sweeping, terrifying cultural fear that civilization was basically decaying, that we
Yeah.
were genetically moving backwards into chaos.
And if that's your fear, then any unusual mind, whether it's brilliant or challenged, has to be explained. It's a potential threat.
Precisely. So the scientific community has to figure out, is genius an evolutionary step forward, or is it a symptom of the disease?
And so you get these three major lines of thought that emerge.
First, you've got Francis Galton. For him, genius was purely hereditary. It could be bred. This is the root of eugenics.
So for Galton, if you want genius, you have to manufacture it. Savants were just a genetic misfire.
Then you have the criminologist Cesare Lombroso, who took the darkest view. He argued genius itself was a pathology, a deviation near madness. He called genius a pearl, but said its beauty came from the brain essentially breaking itself to make it.
So talent is a wound, not a gift. It's an abnormal reaction to some kind of internal damage.
And finally, you have Henry Havelock Ellis, who tried to find middle ground. He said genius was just an extreme point on a spectrum where one ability gets overinflated at the cost of others.
Which would explain why so many geniuses and savants were, clumsy or socially awkward. It's a trade-off.
Exactly. Talent and defect were two sides of the same coin.
Now, all of these theories just completely crashed and burned when they tried to deal with math. This is what we're calling the arithmetic evasion.
In the 19th century, math wasn't just a subject. It was the absolute symbol of rationality, of civilized, educated man, the peak of elite intellect.
And here's the crisis. When people already labeled low grade or primitive, like Jedediah Buxton or Thomas Fuller, excelled in this specific field, it created this massive social anxiety.
The paradox was just intolerable. You couldn't have a person of low-grade intellect performing the highest rational feats. If you accept that, the whole framework supporting the elite's intellectual superiority just collapses.
So, what did they do? How did the scientific community save their definition of true intelligence?
They used a remarkably cynical strategy. They kicked calculation skills out of the realm of reason altogether.
You're kidding.
No, they recategorized it as merely abnormally developed memory.
Wow. So they took the highest form of reasoning and downgraded it to the lowest. Memory was seen as primitive, rote, something even an animal could do.
Precisely. By calling it just memory, a mechanical function, they could dismiss the savant's abilities and preserve the elite definition of intelligence as something requiring abstract philosophical thought. It was intellectual sleight of hand, really, driven by fear.
And the ultimate collision of all these forces, race, class, pathology, genius, you find it in one person, Thomas Blind Tom Liggins.
Blind Tom was. He was maybe the most consuming cultural figure of the mid-19th century. A black man, born a slave, with profound cognitive and physical disabilities.
Yet he had this staggering piano talent, improvisation, composition, replicating complex pieces after one hearing, all by age 5.
He shattered every single category that white society had built to define him.
And his talent was immediately marketed, right, consumed.
As a commodity. His promoter, who was his slave owner, didn't call it genius. He called it a natural mind to be violently extracted. It's that gold rush era view of talent as a resource to be exploited, not a human trait to be nurtured.
And they leaned into this miracle narrative, didn't they? That he was totally untrained.
Which was a conscious fabrication. The historical records show he got systematic musical instruction. But the public wanted the miracle story. It was more comfortable. It let them separate his talent from any real, thinking human creation.
The cultural discomfort he caused was just immense. Mark Twain wrote about him and described him as being possessed by an archangel that was forced to inhabit his poor, rough hulk.
And Twain's reaction there is the perfect psychological defense mechanism. If you can't categorize Tom by the normal rules of race or ability, his talent has to be external, supernatural. It was a way to admire the music without having to acknowledge the intellect of the human being producing it.
And the prejudice went even deeper with these racialized explanations they used to dismiss his actual creativity.
Oh, yes. Many white critics would praise the performance, but then they'd categorize his rhythmic genius as a low level sensory stimulus, a racial instinct.
Not actual creation.
No. They were basically saying it was a primitive reflex, stripping his music of its intellectual value by claiming black people just have this unthinking, natural musicality. They were using his own music to reinforce the racial hierarchy.
That need to explain away the anomaly, it just dominated the conversation for decades.
It did.
Thankfully, things have shifted. You fast forward to 1943, to Leo Kanner's foundational work on autism. He noted these atypical children with extraordinary memory and ritualized behavior, and he started to suggest that maybe they weren't flawed, they just saw the world through a different lens.
And that opened the door. Now we use the concept of neurodiversity instead of those awful 19th century labels, but the cultural fascination with extreme savant abilities. It's still intense. You see it with movies like Rain Man, inspired by Kim Peek. We're still drawn to that edge of impossible ability.
But that fascination itself has become a focus of critique from inside the disabled community. When we focus so much on those headline-grabbing skills, like redrawing a whole city skyline from memory, it feeds into what's called the supercrip narrative.
And the supercrip narrative is really insidious. It creates this immense pressure. It implies that disabled people have to achieve some kind of transcendent ability. They have to be exceptional despite their disability just to be seen as valuable.
It sets this impossible bar, right? If you're not the person who can calculate any day of the week, your experience of disability is just minimized or it's unseen.
It silences the vast majority of disabled people who live completely fulfilling lives without those headline skills. It reinforces that harmful idea that disability is a flaw that has to be overcome through some spectacular achievement.
Instead of just accepting it as part of human variation.
Exactly. That expectation to overcome is a direct descendant of that 19th century need to classify talent as a pathological exception.
What's so striking, looking across these 2 centuries, is that whether they were seen as class symbols or medical pathologies or part of neurodiversity, the core challenge they posed never changed. They always shattered the idea that mental order and social order should line up perfectly.
That combination of profound cognitive difference and exceptional talent, it just wasn't supposed to exist in the established world order. It was an instability they felt they had to explain away, often sacrificing honesty for social comfort.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought for you to consider. In the 19th century, scientists were obsessed with cranial bumps, trying to physically map talent onto the skull. We've replaced that crude phrenology with neuroscience and brain imaging.
But when we remain so transfixed by the why of it all, why disability and genius coexist, are we just perpetuating that old habit? Are we still putting those who are different into a separate category that has to be explained, rather than just accepted as complex, valuable human beings exactly as they are? That struggle for simple acceptance, that continues today.